Welcome to Historical Legacies. Here, we dive into history's most intriguing stories, unraveling mysteries and uncovering truths from the past. Subscribe to join our journey through time's greatest moments. Saladin, the warrior who united Islam. In the annals of history, few figures stand as tall as al-ad-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub, known to the world as Saladin. A man of unparalleled military genius, diplomatic acumen, and unwavering faith, he emerged from the turmoil of the 12th century to forge a legacy that would endure for centuries. His name became synonymous with chivalry, leadership, and unity at a time when the Islamic world was fragmented by internal rivalries and external threats. Born into a Kurdish family in the service of the Zengid dynasty, Saladin's rise to power was not predestined, but carved through strategic brilliance and relentless determination. He navigated the complex political landscape of the Middle East, gradually consolidating power and rallying disparate Muslim factions under a single banner. His greatest challenge, and triumph, would come in the form of the Crusaders, the European invaders who had seized Jerusalem nearly a century before. Saladin's moment of destiny arrived in 1187 when he led his forces in the legendary Battle of Hattin, a victory that paved the way for the recapture of Jerusalem. Yet, it was not only his battlefield prowess that defined him. It was his sense of honor, mercy, and commitment to justice. Unlike many conquerors of his time, he treated his enemies with dignity, earning the respect of even his fiercest adversaries, including Richard the Lionheart. This documentary will take you through the gripping journey of Saladin's life, from his humble beginnings to his rise as Sultan, his struggles and victories, and his lasting impact on the world. It is a story of faith, ambition, and the power of unity, a story of a warrior who not only reclaimed lands but also won hearts. Part 1: A World in Chaos. The Islamic landscape before Saladin. The banners of the Crusaders flew high over Jerusalem, casting a long shadow over the Muslim world. The year was 1099, and the First Crusade had reached its brutal climax. Christian knights, driven by religious fervor, stormed the Holy City, cutting down its Muslim and Jewish inhabitants in a massacre that sent shockwaves across the region. But as the blood dried on Jerusalem streets, the response from the Muslim world was not immediate retaliation. It was silence, fragmentation, and discord. The Islamic world of the 12th century was not a unified empire but a fractured mosaic of warring states, each ruled by ambitious leaders more concerned with personal power than with the growing Crusader threat. The once mighty Abbasid Caliphate, which had ruled the Islamic world from Baghdad, was a shadow of its former self, reduced to little more than a symbolic authority while real power lay in the hands of regional warlords. The Seljuk Turks, who had once dominated Persia and Anatolia, were caught in their own internal struggles, their empire crumbling under the weight of infighting. To the west, the Fatimid Caliphate ruled Egypt, but it too was in decline, torn apart by court intrigues and weakened by internal divisions. This disunity allowed the Crusaders to carve out their own states in the heart of the Muslim world. The Kingdom of Jerusalem, the County of Tripoli, the Principality of Antioch, each was a constant reminder of Muslim weakness and Christian expansion. Yet instead of rallying together, Muslim rulers turned against one another. Petty rivalries, betrayals, and power struggles consumed them while the Crusaders fortified their positions. But change was on the horizon. In the city of Mosul, a powerful warlord named Imad ad-Din Zengid emerged, launching a campaign to push back against Christian forces. He laid the foundation for resistance, but it was his son, Nur ad-Din, who would become the first true leader to recognize that the only way to defeat the Crusaders was through unity. He strengthened the armies of Syria, defeated Crusader forces, and began consolidating Muslim lands, creating the conditions for a leader who could finish what he had started. Amid this backdrop of war, betrayal, and shifting alliances, a child was born in 1137 in Tikrit. He was named Yusuf ibn Ayyub, but history would remember him as Saladin. Raised in a family of Kurdish warriors, his early life was shaped by the very chaos that had gripped the Muslim world. His father, Ayyub, served under Nur ad-Din's growing empire, and from a young age, Saladin was exposed to both the political intricacies and the brutal realities of war. The people of the Islamic world longed for a leader, one who could not only match the Crusaders in battle but also unite the broken lands of Islam under a single banner. They did not know it yet, but that leader had already been born. In the years to come, he would rise from the shadows of Nur ad-Din's court, proving himself in battle, earning the loyalty of his soldiers, and forging an empire that would challenge the Crusader strongholds. The world was about to change. The era of Saladin was approaching. Part 2. The early years of Saladin. The year was 1137, and in the turbulent city of Tikrit, a child was born into a family of warriors. His name was Yusuf ibn Ayyub, but history would remember him as Saladin. His father, Ayyub, and uncle Shirkuh were trusted military commanders under the Zengids, a rising force in the Islamic world. However, on the very night of his birth, fate took a sharp turn. Ayyub was forced to flee Tikrit after a political dispute, setting the stage for a life shaped by displacement, warfare, and an unrelenting pursuit of purpose. From Tikrit, the family sought refuge in Mosul, where Ayyub entered the service of Imad ad-Din Zengid, the powerful warlord determined to unify Muslim lands. Here, Saladin's earliest years were spent in the company of soldiers, statesmen, and scholars, absorbing the lessons of war and governance from a young age. As his father gained favor, the family moved again, this time to Baalbek and later Damascus, where Saladin's real education began. Unlike many warriors of his time, Saladin was not solely focused on combat. He had an insatiable curiosity for knowledge, studying the Quran, history, philosophy, and poetry. He was particularly drawn to Islamic scholarship, which deeply influenced his future leadership. But even as he delved into learning, his military training was never neglected. Under the watchful eye of his father and uncle, he practiced swordsmanship, archery, and horsemanship, learning the discipline that would one day define his rule. The world around him was one of constant conflict. The Crusaders had solidified their grip on Jerusalem and the Levant, while Nur ad-Din, Zengid's son, fought tirelessly to unify the Muslim world against them. Saladin grew up witnessing these battles firsthand, observing strategies, understanding the delicate balance of power, and recognizing the flaws in both Muslim and Crusader leadership. He saw not only the brutality of war but also the necessity of wisdom, patience, and diplomacy. One of the most defining influences in his life was his uncle, Shirkuh, a fearless warrior and a key general under Nur ad-Din. Unlike his father, who excelled in administration, Shirkuh was a battlefield tactician, commanding respect through sheer military brilliance. Saladin followed in his shadow, serving as his aide and learning the complexities of leadership through direct experience. Though young, he absorbed every lesson, every movement, every command that shaped the tides of war. Under Nur ad-Din's growing empire, Saladin witnessed what true discipline and unity could achieve. He learned that without organization, the Muslim world would never reclaim its lost lands. Yet, despite his growing military experience, he was still regarded as just another nobleman's son, a promising but untested young man. No one suspected that this quiet, thoughtful youth would one day emerge as the leader the Muslim world had been waiting for. By the time Saladin reached adulthood, he had cultivated both military and administrative expertise. He was not just a warrior. He understood governance, the power of alliances, and the importance of faith in leadership. The stage was set. He was ready to prove himself, but his time had not yet come. He remained in the service of Nur ad-Din, waiting for the moment when fate would call him to the forefront of history. The tides of war were shifting. A new chapter in Saladin's life was about to begin. Part 3. A young warrior rises. Saladin's entry into military and politics. The Muslim world was at a crossroads. The Crusaders held their strongholds in the Holy Land, tightening their grip on Jerusalem and surrounding territories. Divided Muslim states struggled to mount a unified defense, and in the heart of this chaos, a young warrior was preparing to rise. Saladin had trained for years, but now, his time had come. At the heart of Saladin's military education stood his uncle, Shirkuh, a bold and ruthless commander whose reputation on the battlefield was legendary. Unlike his father, Ayyub, who preferred administration and diplomacy, Shirkuh believed that true power was forged in war. Under his uncle's watchful eye, Saladin learned the art of warfare, not just how to fight, but how to think like a general. He studied enemy movements, mastered logistics, and, most importantly, understood the power of patience in battle. His first steps into war were unglamorous. He was not yet a leader, merely an observer, assigned to support the logistical operations of Nur ad-Din's campaigns against the Crusaders. Yet, he absorbed every lesson, every command, every mistake that others made. Unlike many warriors who sought only glory, Saladin took the long view. He wanted to understand the mechanics of war, the failures of past Muslim rulers, and the mistakes that had allowed the Crusaders to gain such a strong foothold. Beyond the battlefield, Saladin entered the dangerous world of court politics. Nur ad-Din's court in Damascus was a place where words were as deadly as swords. Saladin watched as alliances were forged and broken, as men rose to power and fell just as quickly. He learned that victory was not won by brute force alone. It required diplomacy, strategy, and the ability to unite people under a single cause. This realization would shape his leadership in the years to come. Then came the mission that would alter the course of his life. Nur ad-Din turned his attention to Egypt, a land of immense wealth but fractured leadership. The Fatimid Caliphate, weak and divided, had become a battleground for power, with Crusaders and Muslim forces both vying for control. Determined to secure this vital territory, Nur ad-Din dispatched his most trusted general, Shirkuh, to lead an expedition to conquer Egypt in his name. At his side, Saladin was chosen to accompany him. At the time, few thought much of the young commander riding alongside Shirkuh. He was competent but unproven, respected but not yet feared. But the road to Egypt would change everything. The battles ahead would transform him from a student of war into a master of it. He would not only witness history but shape it. The sands of Egypt awaited. The tides of war were about to pull Saladin into a struggle that would define the rest of his life. Part 4. The Road to Power. Saladin's Rise in Egypt and Syria. The journey to Egypt was fraught with peril. As Saladin rode alongside his uncle, Shirkuh, he was no longer just an observer. He was stepping into the heart of a power struggle that would shape the fate of the Muslim world. Egypt, the seat of the Fatimid Caliphate, was a land of immense wealth but fragile leadership. While the Crusaders sought to expand their influence, the Sunni forces of Nur ad-Din saw an opportunity to reclaim the region under their rule. A fierce contest for power was underway, and Saladin was about to become a key player. Upon arrival, the campaign was met with resistance from both the Fatimid forces and their Crusader allies. Battles erupted across the Nile, with Shirkuh leading the charge. Saladin, though still a secondary figure in command, displayed remarkable tactical awareness and a natural ability to lead men in combat. As the fighting raged, he proved invaluable, not only as a warrior but as a strategist, mastering the intricacies of supply lines, battlefield formations, and siege warfare. Each battle sharpened his instincts, preparing him for the greater role ahead. After a relentless campaign, Shirkuh achieved victory in 1169, securing control over Egypt and toppling the Fatimid vizier. In recognition of his loyalty and skill, Shirkuh was named the new vizier of Egypt, effectively making him the most powerful man in the region. But fate had other plans. Just 2 months later, Shirkuh died suddenly, leaving a dangerous power vacuum. The question loomed: who would lead Egypt now? To the surprise of many, the answer was Saladin. At just 31 years old, he was appointed the new vizier of Egypt, a decision that many underestimated at first. The Fatimid Caliphate, though weakened, still held significant influence, and Saladin's position was precarious. He was surrounded by enemies, Fatimid loyalists, ambitious rivals, and Crusaders eager to exploit any weakness. Yet, unlike Shirkuh, who ruled through sheer force, Saladin approached leadership differently. His first move was to consolidate power without provoking outright rebellion. Rather than dismantling the Fatimid regime overnight, he carefully weakened its influence from within. He placed loyal Sunni administrators in key positions, gradually eroding the authority of the Shura Caliph while avoiding direct confrontation. At the same time, he maintained a firm but just rule, winning over Egyptian soldiers and officials through diplomacy, fairness, and financial stability. It was a delicate balancing act, one that required patience, cunning, and absolute resolve. In the shadows, however, his true goal was taking shape. He was not content with simply being Egypt's vizier. He saw a greater purpose. Egypt was the key to uniting the Muslim world against the Crusaders. If he could stabilize the region and merge its forces with those of Nur ad-Din, he could create a single, powerful front against the Christian invaders. But for now, he had to play the long game. Then, in 1171, Saladin made his boldest move yet. With careful planning and growing support from Egypt's military elite, he officially abolished the Fatimid Caliphate, bringing Egypt fully under Sunni rule. The last Fatimid caliph, Al-Adid, died soon after, and with him, the Shura dynasty that had ruled Egypt for over 2 centuries came to an end. For the first time in generations, Egypt and Syria stood united under Sunni leadership, a crucial step toward resisting the Crusader threat. Yet, Saladin's rise to power had only just begun. Though he had secured Egypt, he was still a subordinate to Nur ad-Din, who ruled from Damascus. Tensions between the two were growing. The question was no longer whether Saladin could rule, it was whether he would obey. The road to absolute power was still uncertain, but one thing was clear. The era of Saladin had truly begun. Part 5. Unifying the Muslim world. Breaking internal divisions. Saladin had secured Egypt, but his ambitions stretched far beyond its borders. The Muslim world was still deeply divided. Petty rivalries, regional warlords, and power-hungry emirs kept the Islamic states fragmented. While the Crusaders occupied key territories in the Levant, the greatest obstacle to resisting them was not Christian knights, it was the disunity among Muslim rulers themselves. If Saladin was to reclaim Jerusalem, he needed to do what no leader before him had achieved: unite Islam under a single banner. Despite his growing power, Saladin was still nominally under the rule of Nur ad-Din, the formidable leader of Syria. Their relationship had always been complex. Saladin owed his rise to Nur ad-Din's support, yet as his influence in Egypt grew, so did tensions between the two. Nur ad-Din feared that Saladin might become too powerful, and their uneasy alliance teetered on the brink of conflict. But fate intervened. Nur ad-Din died unexpectedly in 1174, leaving his vast territories vulnerable to instability and power struggles. Seizing the moment, Saladin marched into Syria, not as a conqueror but as a liberator. He framed his campaign as one of restoring order and protecting Islam from both Crusaders and internal corruption. His first target was Damascus, the heart of Nur ad-Din's empire. Many expected a brutal siege, but instead, the gates of Damascus opened to him without bloodshed. The people welcomed him as a just and wise ruler, believing he would continue Nur ad-Din's mission of defending the faith. With Damascus secured, Saladin turned his attention to the fractured states that still refused to recognize his authority. However, unification would not come without resistance. Powerful Muslim rulers, particularly in Aleppo and Mosul, resisted his rule, fearing the loss of their autonomy. They viewed Saladin as an ambitious upstart rather than a rightful leader. Yet, Saladin's strategy was not to crush his rivals through sheer force. He preferred diplomacy over war, offering terms that allowed local leaders to swear allegiance while maintaining their positions. Through careful negotiations, political marriages, and selective battles, he slowly brought the key cities of Syria under his control. But not all enemies could be reasoned with. The ruler of Aleppo, Gumishtekhin, refused to submit and sought an alliance with the Crusaders to counter Saladin's expansion. This betrayal could not be tolerated. In a series of swift and calculated campaigns, Saladin laid siege to Aleppo, outmaneuvering its defenders and forcing its surrender in 1183. With Aleppo now his, the last major Sunni stronghold resisting him had fallen. Yet, his greatest challenge remained: Mosul, the powerful city in northern Iraq. Its ruler, al-Din, refused to acknowledge Saladin's authority. Knowing that an all-out war would weaken his forces before facing the Crusaders, Saladin took a different approach. He launched a prolonged campaign of pressure, surrounding Mosul, cutting off its alliances, and forcing negotiations. In 1186, after years of careful maneuvering, Mosul's leadership finally recognized Saladin's supremacy. For the first time in decades, the Muslim world was no longer a fractured collection of rival states. Under Saladin's rule, Egypt, Syria, and much of Mesopotamia stood united, forming a single, powerful empire. With his back secure and his armies stronger than ever, Saladin could now turn his full attention toward his ultimate goal: the Crusaders and the recapture of Jerusalem. The time for internal struggles was over. The war for the Holy Land was about to begin. Part 6. The Crusader Threat, the Christian Hold on Jerusalem. For nearly a century, Jerusalem had been a flashpoint of conflict between Christians and Muslims. The city, sacred to both religions, had been seized by the First Crusade in 1099, and the Crusaders established the Kingdom of Jerusalem, creating a thorn in the side of the Muslim world. Over the years, the Crusaders expanded their presence, securing several key coastal cities such as Acre, Jaffa, and Tyre, fortifying their hold on the region. As the years passed, the Crusader kingdom grew in strength, thanks in part to European monarchs and knights who saw the Holy Land as their destiny. But while the Crusaders were busy strengthening their foothold, the Muslim world remained fractured, and Jerusalem was a distant, elusive prize. That was until Saladin began his campaign to unite the Muslim world. With his growing influence across Egypt and Syria, he was no longer just a regional ruler. He was becoming the unifying force the Muslims needed to challenge the Crusaders and their stronghold in the Levant. The Crusaders, led by King Baldwin IV of Jerusalem, were well aware of the rising threat posed by Saladin. Baldwin, though a brave and skilled warrior, was fighting against not only the unifying force of Saladin but also his own deteriorating health. Stricken with leprosy, Baldwin's ability to defend the kingdom was severely compromised. But even as Baldwin's health declined, the Crusader states remained entrenched in their fortified cities and castles, a resilient bastion of Christian power in the Holy Land. Saladin's focus was clear. Jerusalem was the ultimate prize, and reclaiming it would not only unite the Muslim world but also be a decisive blow to the Crusader presence in the region. The city's significance could not be overstated. It was the spiritual center of the Islamic world, and Saladin knew that its capture would not only define his legacy but restore honor to Islam. However, taking Jerusalem would not be easy. The Crusaders had transformed it into a heavily fortified city, with massive walls, strong defenses, and a determined garrison. Despite their vulnerabilities, they held Jerusalem with fierce tenacity, knowing that its loss would mean the collapse of their control over the entire region. For Saladin, the stakes were monumental. He would have to gather all his resources, muster the full force of his unified empire, and employ both brilliant military strategy and diplomatic finesse to bring the city to its knees. But before he could launch a full-scale assault, Saladin first focused on weakening the Crusader presence in the surrounding territories. He engaged in a series of calculated skirmishes, cutting off key supply routes and isolating the Crusader strongholds from one another. The Crusaders were slowly losing their grip, their forces stretched thin, and their morale weakening with each passing month. Saladin knew that timing was everything. His forces had to be strong enough to siege the city, and the Crusaders had to be on the verge of collapse. By 1187, after years of preparations, Saladin launched his bold, full-scale campaign toward Jerusalem. As his army advanced through the rugged terrain of the Levant, Saladin's forces proved superior in both tactics and morale. His forces moved swiftly, conquering key towns and fortresses that dotted the path to Jerusalem, while the Crusaders scrambled to assemble a defense. It was clear that the balance of power had shifted dramatically in favor of the Muslims. Saladin's plan was now in motion. The time for a decisive confrontation with the Crusaders had arrived. Jerusalem awaited its fate. Part 7. The Battle of Hattin, the turning point of history. The stage was set for one of the most pivotal battles in medieval history, the Battle of Hattin. In 1187, after years of careful planning and strategic maneuvers, Saladin was ready to strike a decisive blow against the Crusader forces. Jerusalem was within reach, but first, the Crusaders had to be dealt with once and for all. The Crusader states had grown complacent in their power, underestimating Saladin's military brilliance and underprepared for the siege that loomed on the horizon. The Crusader army, led by King Guy of Lusignan, had been fractured for months, struggling with internal rivalries and lack of coordination. Despite this, Guy was determined to engage Saladin, believing that a show of force would drive the Muslims back and secure their control over the Holy Land. What they didn't know was that Saladin had been meticulously tracking their movements and knew exactly how to exploit their weaknesses. Saladin's strategy was simple yet profound: divide and conquer. Instead of focusing solely on Jerusalem, he decided to cripple the Crusader supply lines and weaken their morale by attacking their ability to maneuver across the region. In the lead-up to the battle, he began a strategic campaign to isolate the Crusader forces, cutting off their access to water, crucial supplies, and reinforcements. This was a tactic that would force the Crusaders into a position where they would either have to surrender or face destruction. In early July 1187, Saladin lured King Guy and his army into a trap by baiting them into pursuing a decoy Muslim force near the Horns of Hattin, a hill located between the Sea of Galilee and the city of Tiberias. The Crusaders, desperate for a decisive confrontation, took the bait, marching toward the seemingly vulnerable Muslim force. What they didn't realize was that Saladin's army was waiting for them, hidden, positioned at a strategic vantage point, and ready to strike when the time was right. As the Crusaders neared the battlefield, they found themselves surrounded, cut off from water and in a scorching desert heat that drained their strength. The heat wave became a weapon in itself, as the Crusader army, already depleted by months of exhaustion, began to collapse under the relentless conditions. Saladin's forces launched a ferocious assault, attacking the Crusaders from all sides while they struggled to regroup and maintain cohesion. The battle raged fiercely, but it was clear that Saladin's tactical genius was beginning to tip the scales. His cavalry, armed with superior mobility and discipline, relentlessly harried the Crusaders, leaving them little room to maneuver or organize counterattacks. By nightfall, the Crusaders were decimated, their morale shattered, their leadership in disarray, and their forces scattered across the battlefield. The decisive moment had come. Saladin captured King Guy and many other high-ranking Crusader knights, turning the tide of the war completely in his favor. The capture of the Crusader leadership was a crushing blow. With the defeat of their army at Hattin, the Crusaders lost the momentum they had held for nearly a century. Jerusalem was no longer safe in their hands, and the road to the city was now wide open for Saladin's forces. In the aftermath of the battle, Saladin treated his prisoners with remarkable dignity and respect, a move that would define his legacy as a ruler and a military leader. Unlike the Crusaders, who had slaughtered Muslims in their conquest of Jerusalem decades earlier, Saladin allowed the captured knights and soldiers to ransom themselves or be set free without bloodshed. This act of mercy not only shocked the Christian world but also solidified Saladin's reputation as a chivalrous leader who fought for a noble cause, not simply for conquest. The Battle of Hattin was a turning point. The Crusaders were defeated, their hold on the Holy Land shattered, and Saladin was free to make his next move. The recapture of Jerusalem was now inevitable. Part 8. The Recapture of Jerusalem, a victory with compassion. The Battle of Hattin had dealt a mortal blow to the Crusader forces, leaving them broken and scattered across the Holy Land. Saladin's victory had shifted the balance of power, but the most significant prize was yet to be claimed: Jerusalem. For nearly a century, the city had been under Christian control, and its symbolic importance to both the Christian and Muslim worlds was undeniable. For Saladin, its recapture was not merely a military conquest but an act of spiritual and cultural restoration. After the Battle of Hattin, the Crusaders had little chance to mount any meaningful resistance. The road to Jerusalem lay open, and Saladin's army, now unified and strengthened by its triumph, began its march toward the city. The Crusader garrison in Jerusalem, led by Balian of Ibelin, knew that the end was near. Jerusalem was isolated, its defenders exhausted, and their resources dwindling. Balian, though brave, was aware that the defense of the city was no longer tenable. Saladin's forces were too large and well prepared. As Saladin's army approached Jerusalem, the city's inhabitants could only look on in terror and uncertainty. The Crusaders who had conquered the city in 1099 had shown no mercy, massacring thousands of its Muslim and Jewish residents. The Muslims had never forgotten the brutality they had faced during that conquest. And now, the tables had turned. Jerusalem was about to fall into the hands of Saladin and his forces, but the question was, how would he handle this victory? Would he avenge the atrocities committed by the Crusaders, or would he take a different path? Saladin's response to the situation stunned the world. Despite the centuries of violence between Christians and Muslims, and despite the opportunity for vengeance, Saladin chose mercy over bloodshed. He offered the city's defenders a chance to surrender peacefully, assuring them that they would be allowed to leave unharmed if they chose not to fight. The Christian inhabitants, terrified and unsure of their fate, negotiated for their lives, and Saladin granted them safe passage out of the city. His decision to show compassion was not only a powerful statement of his leadership but also a testament to his deep commitment to justice. restoring the city with honor rather than revenge. On October 2, 1187, after a series of negotiations, Jerusalem's gates opened to Saladin's army. The Muslims, including those who had been exiled or persecuted under Crusader rule, poured into the city, reclaiming what was rightfully theirs. But what followed was not the brutal slaughter many had expected, but a peaceful and orderly transition of power. Saladin personally oversaw the protection of the Christian churches, including the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, ensuring that the Christian community would be allowed to worship freely. The Mosque of Al-Aqsa, the Dome of the Rock, and other holy sites were restored to their Islamic significance, but Saladin's generosity extended to the Christian and Jewish populations as well, allowing them to maintain their places of worship and safety. The world took note of Saladin's conduct. Rather than engaging in vengeful retribution, he demonstrated remarkable statesmanship and leadership, gaining the respect of both his own people and the Christian world. The fact that Saladin had recaptured Jerusalem without bloodshed became a defining moment in history. He was not only a military leader but a ruler who sought peace and justice, showing that war could be fought with honor, and victory could be claimed with compassion. Saladin's handling of Jerusalem marked a dramatic departure from the Crusaders' bloody conquests. It solidified his reputation as a chivalrous knight and a compassionate ruler, who sought to unite, rather than divide, the peoples of the Holy Land. For Saladin, Jerusalem was not just a city. It was a symbol of his broader vision of Islamic unity and coexistence. The recapture of the city was a monumental victory, but it was the compassionate manner in which it was achieved that truly made it a triumph for the ages. As Saladin took his place in the heart of the city, his vision for a united Muslim world seemed to be within reach, but the challenges were far from over. The Crusaders, despite their defeat, would not relinquish their claim to Jerusalem without further resistance. The stage was now set for a new chapter in the struggle for control of the Holy Land, one that would lead directly into the Third Crusade and the eventual clash between Saladin and Richard the Lionheart. Part 9. The Third Crusade. The clash with Richard the Lionheart. The recapture of Jerusalem in 1187 had sent shockwaves through Christendom, and the Third Crusade was a direct response to Saladin's victory. News of the fall of Jerusalem reached the courts of Europe, and Pope Gregory VIII called for a new crusade to reclaim the Holy City for Christianity. The Crusader kingdoms rallied once more, this time under the leadership of the most renowned of all Christian knights, Richard the Lionheart, King of England. The stage was set for an epic showdown between two of the most formidable leaders of the medieval world, one representing Islam and the other Christianity. Saladin, having just completed his triumphant recapture of Jerusalem, found himself once again facing the full might of the Crusader forces. The Third Crusade was led by three powerful monarchs, Richard the Lionheart, Philip II of France, and Frederick I Barbarossa of the Holy Roman Empire. Although Barbarossa drowned during the journey, and Philip soon withdrew, it was Richard, with his exceptional military skill and strategic genius, who proved to be Saladin's most formidable adversary. The two leaders clashed both on the battlefield and in the corridors of diplomacy. Richard's reputation as a fierce warrior and tactician had preceded him, and he quickly gained a reputation as the Crusaders' most formidable commander. His military exploits, including his siege of Acre in 1191, were legendary, and Saladin understood that Richard was not just a symbol of Christian resolve but also a serious threat to his newly established control over the region. However, despite their differing faiths, the two leaders found a shared respect for each other's military prowess, and their interactions became as much about honor and strategy as about the clash of empires. The Crusader army's first major objective was to capture the port city of Acre, an important strategic location for controlling the coastal routes to Jerusalem. Richard, with his relentless siege tactics, was instrumental in the eventual capture of the city, but it came at a great cost. Thousands of Crusader and Muslim lives were lost, and Saladin's forces, though forced to retreat, continued to hold their ground in the Holy Land. The siege of Acre marked the beginning of the prolonged conflict that would define the Third Crusade, with both sides fighting fiercely for control of key cities and regions in the Holy Land. But while Richard's forces enjoyed some victories, Saladin's resilience was unyielding. He continued to harry the Crusaders, launching guerrilla raids and exploiting any weakness he could find in their supply lines. Despite Richard's tactical brilliance, Saladin maintained his hold over the vast majority of the land surrounding Jerusalem, and the city remained firmly out of reach for the Crusaders. The siege of Arsuf in 1191 would be one of the defining moments of the Third Crusade. where Richard the Lionheart faced off against Saladin in one of the most iconic battles of the Crusades. The battle itself was a stunning display of military strategy, with Richard's cavalry cutting through Saladin's forces with incredible precision, yet it was not a decisive victory for either side. While Richard had successfully routed Saladin's forces, the battle did not result in the recapture of Jerusalem, which remained an elusive goal. As the Crusaders pressed on toward Jerusalem, they realized that their hope of retaking the city was diminishing. The region had been drained of resources, and both Saladin and Richard were increasingly exhausted from the long, drawn-out campaign. Both leaders recognized that their forces were too evenly matched for a direct assault on Jerusalem to succeed without devastating consequences. In the face of this mutual understanding, the two leaders resorted to diplomacy. In 1192, after years of fighting and heavy casualties on both sides, Saladin and Richard agreed to a truce, which allowed Christian pilgrims access to Jerusalem while leaving the city under Muslim control. The peace was not permanent, but it did prevent further bloodshed in the immediate aftermath of the Crusade. The Third Crusade had failed in its primary objective of retaking Jerusalem, but it had achieved something of value. It had demonstrated the strength and resilience of both leaders and the enduring struggle for control of the Holy Land. Saladin's refusal to give up Jerusalem, even in the face of overwhelming Crusader forces, would become one of his most defining traits. Richard, on the other hand, gained further fame for his unwavering determination and skill, cementing his legacy as one of the greatest warriors of the age. While their direct clash in the Third Crusade did not result in a clear victory for either side, it ensured that the struggle for Jerusalem would continue for years to come. Saladin, however, would remain a symbol of Islamic unity and resilience, a figure whose leadership and compassion transcended the battlefield. The Third Crusade may have ended in a stalemate, but the legacies of both Saladin and Richard the Lionheart would continue to shape the future of the Holy Land for generations to come. The two leaders would be remembered not only for their military achievements but also for the respect they shared for one another, a rare phenomenon in a time of fierce religious and political rivalry. Part 10. Diplomacy and War. The Final Years of Conflict. As the Third Crusade concluded with a truce in 1192, the conflict over Jerusalem did not disappear. It merely entered a new phase. Saladin, though victorious in maintaining control over the Holy City, knew that his position was still precarious. The Christian kingdoms in the Holy Land remained a significant threat, and the political landscape was ever-shifting, demanding a delicate balance of diplomacy and military readiness to preserve the gains he had fought so hard to achieve. Despite the temporary peace, Saladin's attention never wavered from the Crusaders. He understood the need for constant vigilance. Although Richard had returned to England, other European monarchs, such as Philip II of France, continued to make political moves that threatened the fragile peace Saladin had secured. The Crusader states in the Levant were now more deeply entrenched, making any attempts to eliminate them entirely impractical. Saladin, ever pragmatic, turned his attention to strengthening his internal alliances, ensuring the unity of his forces in the face of external threats. His vision of a unified Muslim front extended beyond military dominance. He sought the cooperation of local rulers, calling for a collective effort to uphold the integrity of the region. His diplomacy was crucial in maintaining unity among the various factions, which included Kurds, Egyptians, and Bedouins, all of whom had different cultural backgrounds and priorities. In the years following the Third Crusade, Saladin continued to defend his territories against the Crusader remnants while also dealing with political intrigues within his own ranks. His brother, Taqi al-Din, had become a key figure in his administration, and their relationship was a delicate balance of cooperation and rivalry. While Taqi al-Din was loyal, his ambitions sometimes posed a challenge to Saladin's unity, and navigating these internal tensions required his usual blend of diplomacy and forceful leadership. The Crusader threat continued to linger on the periphery, but Saladin also focused on expanding his influence beyond the Holy Land, particularly in the Arabian Peninsula and the Levant. His vision extended across the Muslim world, and he worked tirelessly to consolidate control over vast regions, ensuring that his leadership could withstand future Crusader campaigns. His military campaigns in the surrounding areas were not always massive, but were incredibly effective in keeping his enemies at bay. Despite the relative peace that followed the Third Crusade, Saladin's final years were marked by a series of smaller conflicts, each of which tested his leadership skills and resilience. The Crusaders, though weakened, were far from defeated, and as the years passed, Saladin had to remain ever watchful for any signs of renewed aggression. Diplomatically, Saladin continued to engage in negotiations with various Crusader leaders, balancing between offering peace and preparing for war. He often relied on marriage alliances, peace treaties, and diplomatic exchanges to ensure that the Crusaders' attention was divided. But he was never naive. He knew that a full-scale war was always a possibility, and his military readiness never diminished. The military environment of the time also dictated Saladin's strategy, especially as the Crusaders sought to exploit any vulnerabilities in his rule. One of his greatest challenges was managing the resource scarcity in his territories, a problem exacerbated by years of conflict. Saladin was known for his efficient governance, but maintaining such a vast empire with so many moving parts was increasingly difficult. He relied heavily on the loyalty of his generals and advisors to help oversee various aspects of the territories under his control. Although his health began to deteriorate in the late 1190s, Saladin remained focused on securing his legacy and safeguarding the Muslim world against the encroaching Crusader threat. Illness gradually took its toll on the once indomitable warrior, but his strategic mind and desire for peace kept him engaged in both military affairs and diplomacy right up to the end. His resolve to prevent further bloodshed in the Holy Land remained a constant, though the reality of his failing health was becoming harder to ignore. In these final years, Saladin's leadership was tested by the tension between war and diplomacy. The Crusaders were constantly watching, waiting for an opportunity to strike, while Saladin knew that securing his empire required more than just fighting. It required the wisdom to navigate the complex political web of his time. The final years of Saladin's reign were marked by his dedication to maintaining peace, as well as his constant efforts to reinforce the alliances and territories that had made his empire so formidable. His political maneuvering ensured that his legacy would endure long after his death, even as the region he fought so hard to protect remained a battleground for future conflicts. Part 11. Saladin's Leadership, a Vision Beyond War. Saladin was not just a military commander. He was a visionary leader whose influence transcended the battlefield. His reign marked a turning point in the history of the Muslim world, with his leadership laying the foundation for a new era of governance, diplomacy, and cultural exchange. Where many conquerors focused solely on military dominance, Saladin's leadership was driven by the conviction that a true ruler must balance power with wisdom, justice, and mercy. In the face of ongoing Crusader threats, Saladin's leadership went beyond tactics and strategy. He understood that the long-term stability of his empire required something more than just securing military victories. He championed a vision of unity among the Muslim world, striving to bridge internal divisions and bring together various factions, often with different interests and backgrounds. Saladin believed that for the Islamic civilization to prosper, it had to be more than just a military force. It had to be unified and prosperous, with strong cultural and social systems that could withstand external pressures. One of Saladin's greatest achievements was his emphasis on justice and the welfare of his people. Unlike many rulers of his time, who were often seen as oppressive and harsh, Saladin sought to create a fair and compassionate system of governance. He upheld the rights of his subjects, including Christians and Jews, fostering an atmosphere of tolerance in a time when religious divisions often led to persecution and conflict. His respect for religious pluralism was not just a political maneuver, but an integral part of his leadership philosophy, marking a stark contrast to the Crusader forces who often targeted Muslim communities with brutality. Saladin was also a visionary in the administrative sense. While his military campaigns were often his most publicized achievements, he was equally committed to the development of his territories, ensuring that they were well-governed and prosperous. His reforms in taxation, law, and military organization ensured that his empire remained robust despite the ongoing challenges of war. The infrastructure he built laid the groundwork for future rulers, and his emphasis on good governance would inspire generations of Muslim leaders long after his death. His leadership also extended to education and culture, areas where Saladin's influence was just as impactful as his military victories. Saladin understood the importance of knowledge and learning, and he sought to foster a culture of intellectual growth across his realm. He supported scholars, philosophers, and scientists, ensuring that centers of learning flourished under his rule. His patronage of the arts and sciences was rooted in the belief that a well-educated population would be better equipped to confront challenges and contribute to the flourishing of the state. However, Saladin's leadership was not just about internal governance or military tactics. He also had a keen sense of diplomacy that allowed him to navigate the complex relationships between the various Muslim states and Christian powers. His diplomatic efforts with figures like Richard the Lionheart during the Third Crusade demonstrated his ability to negotiate under pressure and seek peace when possible. He was not merely a warrior but a statesman who understood the nuances of power and was willing to seek peaceful solutions when they aligned with his greater vision for the region. Saladin's leadership was deeply rooted in his personal integrity and sense of duty. He was often described as a man of great humility, willing to listen to his advisors and learn from those around him. His piety and commitment to justice were evident in his daily life and interactions with his subjects. Despite his immense power, Saladin lived simply and refrained from the excesses that were common among rulers of his time. He believed that leadership was a service to the people, not an opportunity for personal glory, which earned him respect across the Muslim world and even among his Christian adversaries. Saladin's vision for the future extended far beyond his own reign, ensuring that his leadership would resonate long after his death. He did not view himself as the sole source of power but as a steward of the region, tasked with guiding it through turbulent times. His legacy was one of unity, justice, and wisdom, values that continued to shape the Muslim world for centuries after his passing. The values he instilled in his leadership, the reforms he enacted, and the culture he promoted all contributed to the long-lasting impact of his reign. Saladin's leadership demonstrated that a great ruler must not only be skilled in battle but must also possess the vision to guide his people toward a prosperous and united future. His ability to lead through wisdom, justice, and a commitment to the welfare of his subjects was what truly set him apart from other military leaders of his time. Part 12. The Sultan's Decline, Illness and the End of an Era. The final years of Saladin's reign marked a stark contrast to the vibrant energy and strength that characterized his early years of leadership. As the Sultan's military campaigns and administrative duties took their toll, the once indomitable leader began to suffer from health issues that would eventually lead to his decline. Saladin, who had been renowned for his physical prowess, now found himself struggling with debilitating illness, a reminder of the fragility of even the most powerful rulers. It was around the late 1180s when Saladin's health began to deteriorate significantly. After decades of constant warfare, his body began to show signs of exhaustion. Historians have speculated that his illnesses were a result of the stress of his military campaigns, the weight of his leadership, and perhaps even the climate of the regions he had been in for much of his reign. His nervous system seemed to be under particular strain, with symptoms ranging from headaches to more severe joint pain, leading him to seek rest on many occasions. Yet, despite his declining health, Saladin continued to govern with determination, refusing to relinquish control even as his body grew weaker. The Sultan's illness was compounded by a fateful journey in 1192, when he sought medical treatment for his condition. By this time, his forces had successfully recaptured much of the Holy Land and secured critical victories over the Crusaders, but his personal battle with illness loomed large. His constant travels, from the battlefield to the courtrooms, and his efforts to secure his empire's future left him vulnerable to the wear and tear of relentless activity. The hardships of these years began to erode his vitality, with Saladin often bedridden for weeks at a time. Despite the toll on his health, Saladin did not surrender his duties easily. His ministers and military leaders reported that, even while unwell, the Sultan continued to offer his counsel and make key decisions, though his ability to lead from the front was greatly diminished. His sons, particularly Al-Afdal, were beginning to take more of the reins of governance, though Saladin's presence remained central to the kingdom's functioning. The loyalty and reverence Saladin commanded from his followers were so immense that his health became a matter of grave concern for the entire realm. As Saladin's condition worsened, it became evident that the Sultan was nearing the end of his reign. The threat of instability loomed over the empire as the question of succession became urgent. Saladin had already arranged for his sons to succeed him, but the nature of the transition was still uncertain. He was careful in appointing capable generals and leaders to hold his empire together, but the inevitability of change made everyone uneasy. The unity he had worked so hard to build seemed increasingly fragile as the empire faced the reality of losing its great leader. In his final days, Saladin's illness seemed to take a psychological toll, deepening the Sultan's introspection. He had spent his life in service to his people, but the fear of leaving behind an unstable legacy began to consume him. Saladin's final wishes were focused not just on the continuation of his empire, but on the welfare of the people he had served so selflessly throughout his reign. Even in his last moments, he showed concern for the well-being of his subjects, ensuring that provisions were made for the most vulnerable of his empire. Saladin passed away in 1193, at the age of 55, leaving behind an empire that, while strong, would soon face challenges without its visionary leader. His death marked the end of an era defined by an unwavering commitment to justice, unity, and a vision of a better, more equitable world for his people. The loss of such a towering figure sent ripples through the Muslim world, as well as beyond its borders. The Crusaders, while no longer facing a single unifying force, recognized the end of an epoch marked by Saladin's diplomacy and military acumen. His passing was not just the death of a ruler, but the end of an era of leadership that had shaped the course of history. Saladin's legacy, however, endured far beyond his death. His reforms, his vision of justice and tolerance, and the sense of unity he cultivated in the Muslim world continued to influence future generations of leaders. Though his empire would eventually fragment and face threats from within, the values he instilled lived on, resonating through history as a beacon of enlightened leadership. His death was the closing of one chapter but the opening of another, as his name and his deeds would continue to inspire for centuries to come. Part 13. Saladin's Death. The Passing of a Legend. Saladin's death on March 4, 1193, marked the end of an era that had been defined by his incredible leadership, military brilliance, and commitment to justice. His passing reverberated through the Muslim world and beyond, leaving a void that would be difficult, if not impossible, to fill. Saladin, who had united the Muslim world under his banner and successfully repelled the Crusaders, was now gone, but his legacy lived on in the hearts and minds of his people. In his final moments, Saladin's thoughts were not of personal glory but of the future of his empire. As his health deteriorated, his concern for the stability of the region and the well-being of his people remained at the forefront of his mind. He had spent his life striving to create a unified and just realm, and even as he faced death, he made arrangements to ensure that his vision would continue to shape the course of history. His sons were groomed for leadership, and though Saladin's passing created uncertainty, his influence had already set the stage for a lasting impact on the political landscape of the Middle East. His death, however, was not met with the expected disarray or immediate collapse of his empire. The systems he had put in place and the leaders he had appointed helped maintain a semblance of stability, though the challenges of succession and internal division were never far from the surface. Saladin had worked tirelessly to prepare for this moment, yet no one could entirely predict how his absence would affect the delicate balance of power he had so carefully cultivated. The legacy of Saladin's death was felt far beyond the borders of his empire. To the Crusaders, his passing signified the loss of their most formidable adversary. Richard the Lionheart, his principal rival during the Third Crusade, recognized Saladin's death as a significant event. Even though the two had been enemies on the battlefield, they had shared a mutual respect for one another, and the Christian world felt the loss of a leader who had shown honor and restraint in their dealings with each other. The mutual respect between Saladin and Richard highlighted the extraordinary nature of Saladin's character. A warrior and leader who transcended the usual animosity between opposing forces. Saladin's death also cast a shadow on the Muslim world. While his legacy was undoubtedly monumental, the power vacuum left behind by his passing was palpable. Saladin had unified disparate factions within the Islamic world, but upon his death, these factions began to fracture, with many of his successors struggling to maintain the same level of cohesion. The unifying force of his personality and vision could not be easily replicated, and the empire was soon divided among his sons and key generals, each of whom sought to preserve their own territories and political interests. However, the values Saladin instilled during his reign lived on in the form of his reforms, leadership style, and the principles of justice and tolerance he championed. Even though his empire would eventually splinter, the spirit of unity and justice he promoted continued to resonate with many in the Muslim world. His emphasis on religious tolerance, fair governance, and compassionate leadership were qualities that set him apart from many rulers of his time, and these ideals would continue to influence those who followed in his footsteps. Saladin's death also had profound implications for the Crusades and the ongoing conflict between the Christian and Muslim worlds. With his death, the Muslim world lost its greatest military strategist and diplomat, and while his successors attempted to continue his work, they could not entirely recapture the same level of success against the Crusaders. The Crusades, which had defined so much of the previous decades, continued after Saladin's death, but the loss of their primary opponent shifted the dynamic of the conflict in unpredictable ways. In the years following his death, Saladin's name became synonymous with honor, chivalry, and the ideal of a ruler who sought to serve rather than simply command. He became a legend, not just in the Muslim world, but also in the Christian world, where he was admired for his fairness and respect, even in the heat of battle. His legacy, shaped by his vision, compassion, and strategic genius, became a model of leadership that transcended religious boundaries and inspired future generations of rulers, warriors, and leaders across the globe. In the aftermath of Saladin's death, while the empire he built began to fragment, his legacy remained a source of inspiration for centuries to come. The passing of the great Sultan marked the end of a significant chapter in history, but it also ensured that his name would endure, living on in the hearts of those who admired him and the many who would continue to tell his story for generations to come. Part 14. A Legacy of Honor. How Saladin is Remembered. Saladin's death in 1193 did not mark the end of his influence. On the contrary, it began an enduring legacy that transcended his time, his empire, and even his death. In the centuries that followed, Saladin's memory was preserved not only in the Islamic world but also in the West, where his name became synonymous with chivalry, honor, and the ideal of a just ruler. In the Muslim world, Saladin is regarded as one of the greatest leaders in history, a paragon of Islamic virtue who embodied the principles of justice, humility, and courage. He was not just a military commander but a visionary who sought to unite the Muslim world and provide a sanctuary for its people. His contributions to the recovery of Jerusalem, a city sacred to Muslims, solidified his status as a revered figure, while his efforts to govern fairly and with compassion earned him a place in the hearts of his subjects. For centuries, Saladin has been celebrated as a model of Islamic leadership, and his name has been invoked by Muslim leaders, scholars, and military figures as an example to follow. He inspired generations of rulers and warriors who sought to emulate his bravery on the battlefield and his wisdom in governance. His actions, particularly in the Third Crusade, demonstrated a commitment to justice, even to his enemies. The act of releasing prisoners and treating the defeated with respect became one of the hallmarks of Saladin's leadership, and this set him apart from many of his contemporaries. In the West, Saladin's legacy is equally powerful but manifests in a different form. To the Crusaders and to Christian Europe, he was an adversary who commanded both respect and fear. His military prowess and his ability to withstand the Crusader forces made him a legendary figure in European lore. The famous story of his chivalric treatment of Richard the Lionheart, his principal rival during the Third Crusade, has become emblematic of Saladin's character as a noble and honorable enemy. Despite being at odds with the Crusaders, Saladin's conduct in battle and negotiations stood out as an example of the highest standards of nobility, an adversary who, while fierce, respected his opponents. The Crusaders' admiration for Saladin, in many ways, became a defining feature of his posthumous legacy in the West. This was a testament to his leadership that transcended religious and cultural differences. Richard the Lionheart, after all, expressed admiration for Saladin's courage, and when Saladin passed away, it was reported that Richard mourned the loss of a worthy foe. This mutual respect between Saladin and the Crusaders added a layer of complexity to his legacy, illustrating that his character could not be solely defined by the religious conflicts of his time. Instead, Saladin represented a type of leadership that even his enemies respected. Throughout history, Saladin's memory has been immortalized in literature, poetry, and art. His story has been retold countless times, through poems, songs, and historical accounts, each interpretation adding to the depth of his legendary status. In the modern world, Saladin has been invoked as a symbol of resistance and unification for the Muslim world, as well as an ideal of leadership that places the needs of the people above personal ambition. He has come to symbolize the struggle for justice, and his legacy continues to resonate in contemporary discussions about leadership, governance, and ethics. Saladin's legacy extends beyond history books and the borders of the Islamic world. His name is invoked in political discourse, in the struggles for justice, and in the constant fight for unity and peace. As a statesman, military leader, and man of faith, his multifaceted persona continues to captivate the imaginations of people worldwide. In the modern world, Saladin's legacy has become a beacon of hope for many in the Middle East, where his efforts to unite the Muslim world are seen as a symbol of resistance against division and oppression. His focus on unity, justice, and the well-being of his people serves as a model for contemporary leaders seeking to emulate his principles of governance and military leadership. In this way, Saladin's name endures, a symbol of honor, respect, and integrity. a reminder of what leadership can and should be. Through the centuries, from his death to the present day, Saladin's legacy has remained not just a historical account, but a living, breathing part of global consciousness. His story continues to inspire not only those in the Muslim world but also people across the globe who admire his courage, leadership, and unwavering principles in the face of adversity. His name lives on, carved into the history of the Middle East, into the hearts of those who follow his ideals, and into the minds of those who continue to reflect on what it means to lead with integrity, compassion, and courage. Part 15. Saladin's influence on the modern world. Saladin's life and legacy continue to resonate deeply with people around the world, centuries after his passing. His influence extends far beyond the realms of history and continues to shape modern political discourse, cultural identity, and ideals of leadership. His name is invoked in global struggles for justice, in the fight against oppression, and in the aspirations for unity and peace. As the modern world faces challenges related to division, inequality, and conflict, Saladin's principles remain a source of inspiration for many who seek to lead with integrity and vision. In the Middle East, Saladin is often seen as the quintessential hero and unifier, an embodiment of the desire for unity in a region marked by political fragmentation and sectarian conflict. His vision of a unified Muslim world, where justice and welfare were prioritized over division, is a model that modern leaders continue to strive towards. His ability to transcend narrow political interests and act in the best interests of the people resonates deeply in a region that still grapples with the legacy of colonialism and ongoing conflicts. Saladin's influence is also felt in contemporary discussions about leadership and ethical governance. His commitment to justice, fairness, and compassion set a standard for leaders today, both in the political and military spheres. He led not through brute force, but with wisdom, understanding, and respect for his people, something that is increasingly valued in the 21st century's world of complex geopolitics. Political leaders and scholars look to Saladin's example as a reminder that true power lies not in domination, but in the ability to uplift, unite, and inspire others. His actions in liberating Jerusalem, treating prisoners with dignity, and governing with a sense of responsibility continue to offer lessons on ethical leadership. Beyond the Middle East, Saladin's influence is felt globally in the way he is regarded as a symbol of resilience and determination. In the West, despite being on opposite sides during the Crusades, Saladin is remembered for his chivalric behavior, especially in his interactions with Richard the Lionheart. This mutual respect between adversaries underscores a fundamental aspect of Saladin's character: his ability to navigate conflict with honor and dignity. In a modern world often marked by divisive rhetoric and intolerance, Saladin's ability to maintain respect for his enemies serves as an ideal of how diplomacy and human decency can prevail even in times of war. Saladin's influence can also be seen in popular culture, where his image is frequently invoked in literature, films, and television shows. His story continues to captivate audiences worldwide, from historical epics to modern retellings, ensuring that his legacy remains vibrant and relevant to new generations. Through books, documentaries, and artistic works, Saladin's character is continually reimagined, keeping his spirit alive and inviting fresh interpretations of his leadership and achievements. His ability to command respect across different cultures, even from those who once opposed him, makes him a timeless figure whose legacy transcends geographical and historical boundaries. In the realm of modern Islamic thought, Saladin's legacy is celebrated as the pinnacle of Islamic leadership, showing the world that a leader can be both a fierce warrior and a compassionate ruler. His defense of Jerusalem not only saved an important city for Muslims but also set an example for the protection of religious and cultural heritage in the face of external threats. The value of his leadership continues to inspire Muslim leaders and citizens alike, offering a vision of governance that is grounded in faith, justice, and unity. Saladin's influence is felt in political movements, religious discourse, and even in the broader cultural zeitgeist. He represents a powerful model of leadership, one that integrates strength with virtue and wisdom with compassion. In this way, his name endures, not only as a historical figure but as an ideal that transcends time and place, inspiring individuals and societies to aspire toward something greater than themselves. As Saladin's legacy continues to echo through history, it serves as a reminder that true greatness lies in the ability to unite people, uphold justice, and inspire others to be better. His influence on the modern world is not merely a reflection of the past, but a living testament to the enduring power of leadership, honor, and vision. Thanks for tuning in to Historical Legacies. If you enjoyed this dive into history, please like, subscribe, and share. Join us next time for more fascinating stories from the past.